Hey everyone, it's Classic DM, and we're going to do a really long deep dive into 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons, primarily the first player's handbook. We're not going to flip through the book. I put together a little presentation, and we're going to go through all the different major features and design elements of the game system. And this video is really tailored towards people who already been playing D&D for a long time. So if you're a fan of my AD&D stuff, which the channel was originally based on, this will be an interesting way for you to see, like, so what's the deal with 4E? I never played it, you missed it, your life was too busy, etc. Or if you're a 5th edition player and you never played 4E, you're like, hey, what's the deal with 4E? I've heard a bad rap about it. What's the deal? How's the system work? And of course, if you're a Pathfinder 2nd edition player, you realize there's a lot of similarities between 4th edition and Pathfinder, with a few major conceptual differences. All right, so this is a pretty long video, so let's get into it right away. The core mechanic. So, every one of these versions of D&D since the dawn of time has used a d20 dice for rolls to hit. But there's been some changes along the way. So the way that they use the core mechanic in 4th edition is not going to be really weird or anything like that. You're going to roll a d20. You want to roll high numbers, right? You're going to add relevant modifiers to the dice roll, and you're going to compare it to a target number. But unlike maybe in Pathfinder where melee attacks are attacking armor class, and people are getting saving throws, and you're rolling to hit with spells, it's a little bit different here. They have a lot more interesting way to break out defense into your different ability scores, your armor, and your reflex saves and things like that. So we'll get into, there's a slide for that later on. So another key thing about this version of 4th edition that's really different is you always round down. Okay, so instead of having like a base attack bonus that's in a chart, like in 3.0 or 3.5, or this 2, 4, 6, 8 proficiency thing they do in Pathfinder, or nothing in 2nd edition or 1st edition, you're going to round your level down as part of your core bonus to every single thing that you do. So you'll have situations where you have a bonus that takes into consideration your strength, like a melee attack. And you'll have a ability modifier from your strength number, and then you'll have this always rounded down number from your level. That's how your progression gets larger and larger, and you do get some ability changes over time. Let's go into the different details here and keep going. So it's got the classic ability scores. Now remember, when AD&D came out, the ability scores were presented in the order of strength, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, constitution, charisma, because there was no reflex, will, and fortitude saves, right? Saving throws were based upon your level and what your class was, if I remember correctly. So there was charts like wands, paralyzation, death magic, poison, etc., etc. So saving throws in 4th edition are picking up the idea that was in 3rd and 3.5. They're the first ones to introduce this reflex, will, and fortitude save and bundling your core ability scores together. But we need to read through this, and I don't think you know it all because you know what strength and constitution does. So obviously we know what they mean. Like, we know that strength means your strength to physical power, and important for characters who fight hand to hand. So melee attacks are based on strength. Clerics, fighters, paladins, rangers, and warlords have powers based on strengths. Keyword powers. We're going to talk about powers. 4th edition uses an extensive power system instead of a list of just class feats like in Pathfinder, or spells in a spell book, and you pick which one you want. Your strength might contribute to your fortitude defense. Strength is the key ability for athletic skill checks, and that'll sound familiar too. If you play 3.0, 3.5, or Pathfinder 1, or Pathfinder 2, all that kind of stuff, you've heard athletic and skill checks, and some of that's in here too. It's streamlined though. Constitution, health, stamina, vital force, etc. Your constitution score is added to your hit points at first level. The number of healing surges, a new word, you can use per day is influenced by your constitution. Okay? Many warlock powers are based on constitution. Your constitution might contribute to your fortitude defense, and constitution is a key ability for endurance skill checks. So the ability scores are already starting to touch other elements of the game early on, and you're getting these concepts dropped to you in the player handbook, and they're going to make more sense as we go through it later on. Dexterity, hand-eye coordination, reflexes, agility, balance, etc. Ranged attacks are based on agility. Many ranger and rogue powers are based on, dexterity, not agility. Your dexterity might contribute to your reflex defense. If you wear light armor, your dexterity might contribute to your armor class. And you remember that going all the way back to AD&D, right? Dexterity is a key ability for acrobatic, stealth, and thievery checks. So you're starting to see the pattern here, right? Let's go to intelligence and wisdom, the same kind of things. Wizard powers are based on intelligence. Intelligence might contribute to your reflex defense. Like that didn't happen before, right? Remember, that was mostly all dexterity. If you wear light armor, intelligence might contribute to your armor class. This is very different. Second edition of Pathfinder dealt with this by starting people off with 10 plus to be their armor class, and then the armor you wore didn't have as much of a huge effect. Armor still has a bonus number based upon the higher, the more, I guess you could call it better at mitigating damage. Like plate armor is going to be better than like cloth, right? But intelligence is going to help the casters now no longer be completely squishy. It's a key ability for Arcana, History, Religion checks. That's not a new thing. Wisdom. Many cleric powers are based on wisdom. Your wisdom might contribute to your willpower, will defense. Wisdom is a key attribute, key ability for dungeoneering, heal, insight, nature, perception, skill checks. But notice it doesn't say anything about armor class, right? So your intelligence might affect your armor class, but your wisdom won't. And we're not using wisdom for perception checks like they do in Pathfinder. That was something new they broke away from. All the initiative and things like that were always based on dexterity, your reaction time, not how perceptive you are, which is kind of weird. Anyway, charisma. Paladin and Warlock powers are based on charisma. And you may remember this from 3.0 and 3.5. The Sorcerer class used a lot of charisma, but not Paladins and Warlocks. So more classes are dipping into the different ability scores than previously. So remember, this edition of the game came out in 2008. It survived to around 2014, about 6-year run, and then 5th edition came out. Charisma is a key ability for, these are skills, bluff, diplomacy, intimidate, streetwise. Okay, so, and those dice right there in the picture, I've had since 1977. I can't remember where I got them. It certainly wasn't in Traveler and D&D, I know that, but I remember the day I went down to my local game store and I bought a pack of dice that had 8 of them and only 4 survived. All right, so generating the ability scores. This is not going to be a guide for dummies that don't know how to make a character in a role-playing game. We're not going to do that. What we're going to do instead is point out what's different. So possibly picking up from games like Baldur's Gate 1, Baldur's Gate 2, Icewind Dale, etc., generating your ability scores in the old days was method 3. Pretty much roll 4d6, take the best 3. And I still think that's a great way to do it, especially if you do a huge grid of 6 by 6, and then you assort the ability scores wherever you want them to be. A lot of times it's up to the Dungeon Master. You can play a fantastic game of D&D and have a crap character. I'm sorry, it's not that big of a deal. It's all about what you do and what kind of decisions you make. And you're gonna, as you level up, you would be 2 or 3 or 5 levels less powerful if you start off with nothing at 16, 17, and 18. But they have a thing called the standard array, and they offer this in writing, right? And the standard array is kind of lifted from role-playing games, computer ones, no doubt, where you can say, listen, just take these numbers, 16, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10. Because they're going to be good. Like, on average, they're great. Apply your racial adjustments, because your races in this game boost certain ability scores, right? Which is not unknown, not an unusual concept. And then that becomes your final numbers. You don't roll anything. In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, you have like these base numbers, and you keep getting ability boost as you keep going through the ABC process. So this is much more simple. You want to play a Paladin? Boom. It's the same thing, same stats as a Warlock could be. Now, you can customize them with this point-buy system. This was definitely heavily influenced by computer role-playing games, where you start with 8, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, and you have 22 points to spend, and each point over a certain threshold cost more. I can't stand that method personally. It's just a personal preference. I've always liked either the standard array and then do the racial abilities, which give me a pretty decent character, or rolling the scores. Rolling the scores most of the time will give you junky stats, but then your racial abilities will boost it up. As you level up in 4th edition, at certain intervals, you do gain ability scores. So the ability score modifier, right? Now, this is something that in the very beginning in AD&D, strength would have a bonus to hit and a bonus to damage, etc. And you'd have a constitution bonus that would boost your hit points. They're all very specific wargamey type stuff. When 3.0 came along, they said, hey, let's make a base attack bonus based on classes, and let's make the ability modifier something that we can use across the board for everything else. So every one of your 6 ability scores is going to look up your number in this table. So if you've got 11, it's all +0. So anything over 11 starts to become more interesting, a +1, +2, +3, +4 for 18s. And you can have characters that start off with 19, right? So the attack bonuses in the game, we're going to jump ahead a little bit here. We're going to get into combat much more detailed later. But remember I said you round everything down? Your attack bonuses are calculated based upon what your level is, right? And the ability score associated with the attack. Like, doesn't mean that everything you do is going to be strength or dex. There's no this finesse attack type crap. It depends what the power wants you to use. If it's a spell, it'll have a particular ability score associated with it. So, and you're rounding down. So things like 5 become 2, right? Things like 7 become 3, 8 becomes 4, and 10 becomes 5. You never get this 5.5 and 5.6, and you never round up, right? So if you're level 21, it's only 10, right? It's not 10.5 or 11. All right, so the ability score modifier that you use for attack also adds to that. So as you can see, as you level up, half your level is going to give you this linear growth and a little bit of a better number, and your ability scores go up a little bit every now and then. So if you can focus on the type of attacks that use the same kind of ability score, and then you're also gaining levels, that's going to give you the maximum amount of attack bonus for what you're trying to do, but you need to understand which abilities does your class heavily rely on, which isn't that hard to do. You can't really power game it, but it's a pretty interesting system. Here's a little snapshot of, say, a random character with 17 strength, 15 con, 13 dex, 11 intelligence, 14, 16 for wisdom and charisma. Their ability modifier, if you look it up in the table, is like 3, 2, 1, 0, 2, 3, and then mod plus their half level. If they were level 10, right, then you'd only get 5, so that 5 and 3 becomes 8, 5 and 2 becomes 7, 5 and 1 becomes 6. So that's how it works. And on the character sheet, they're all side by side. Right, and the reflex, will, and fortitude saves are all right there next to it as well. All right, so there's another element. Weapon proficiency bonus is kind of global across everything. So if you kind of like in an AD&D, you're playing a druid, only certain weapons are available to you. So you're proficient, the weapon you're proficient in, you get a bonus. It's usually like +2 to hit. And you have any racial or feat bonuses. Like if you have a particular feat, like 2-weapon fighting that gives you bonuses, that adds 2. And if the item has a magic number on it, or if there's a bonus to hit because of the power, and any other type of bonus. So they're not that hard to add up, though. It sounds hard, but as you can see, you got most of these written on your character sheet. So after you created the character, boom, you got this thing that's grown from the ability score modifier into much later on. And this is just a zoomed-in version of this, because not only do you use them for attacks, which is what this is talking about, use them for ability checks. I love ability checks. I use ability checks in my AD&D game all the time. I do it a little different than they do here. I don't give you 1/2 your level or any kind of crap like that. Say you wanted to have a situation where some kind of a check would have happened, like whether you fall into a pit or it isn't an acrobatics check. Something that is really focused on a particular statistic, like busting down a door with your strength. There's no skill called door busting, right? So you would take 1/2 your level, the relevant ability score modifier, and as you can see, this column right here is always going to be handy for those types of things. You just get to a point where you're just glancing at this column the whole time. You almost don't need the ability modifier in the way anymore. Lastly, if you do any kind of skill checks, like you mentioned acrobatics or athletics or intimidation, right? You're going to take 1/2 your level, yet again, and add the relevant ability score modifier and any other modifiers that might be happening. And that's your total result. So numbers are going to get bigger. They're going to go higher than 20 pretty quickly. You know, at a level 10 character doing some kind of knock down the door check, if you roll a 20, natural 20, you're going to add 8 to it with a 17 strength. That's a 28. So that's also then compared to a DC. Has nothing to do with Daniel Cormier. It's called a difficulty class. We used to call it difficulty check, and we kept calling that all the time. It's the number you need to beat to win. Anything you're trying to do, like an armor class number, you got to beat the armor class number to win. This is the same in Paizo, Pathfinder 1, and Pathfinder 2, and 3.0, and 3.5. None of these concepts are new. They've been around for 24 years, okay? Let's move on. So we talked a little while ago about how attack rolls is the most frequent roll you're going to make in a game. It's your ability versus the defense. Now here's where it gets very interesting. I really like this in 4th edition. Read ahead just for a second. A wizard's fireball spell is an intelligence attack against a target's reflex defense, written as intelligence versus reflex. So when you look at different powers, it's going to tell you what A is versus B, and these can be very varied. They're not just going to be an armor class number. The fighter's longsword attack is strength against armor class. The ability score and the defense involved depend on the attack you're using. If the check results higher than equal to your opponent's defense, you hit, and usually do the damage too, unless there's kind of weird mitigation going on or resistances. The total modifiers you add to attack roll is called your base attack bonus. This is confusing if you played a lot of 3.5 and 3.0, because in 3.0 and 3.5, even if you played the computer version of Neverwinter Nights, base attack bonus was in a chart, and you just looked up the number, and it got big. I mean, you can make these key blade rapier fighters with like plus 78 to hit. It was ridiculous, right? Here's an example of Kira, an 8th level ranger, dexterity to 17, +1 magic bow, shoots her bow at an ogre, right? Her base attack bonus is 10, which includes, that's not coming off of a chart, okay? Here's how you come up with that plus 10. +4 for half her level, because she's 8. 8 divided by 2 is 4. Her dexterity, right, is 17. That gives her +3. Okay? And then +2 bonus for being proficient with the bow, which almost everyone's going to be proficient with their weapon, so almost everyone's going to get this +2 across the board throughout their career. The bow's +1 enhancement bonus. Now, this is a key point. In the old days, you used to have situations where they had a bonus to hit and an enhancement bonus just did bonus to damage. They just kind of lumped that all together and saying it's enhanced, bonus to hit and bonus to damage to see if she hits. So she rolls a 1d20 and she's going to add 10. And they're calling that, all those numbers add up together, they're calling the base attack bonus. If you don't want to use that word, you can call it something else, right? If you get good at pre-calculating it when you're playing the game, like I'm going to shoot with my bow, I'm going to attack with my longsword, I'm going to attack with my flail, you write all the numbers down on your character sheet, boom, you've got the answer right there. You don't have to keep adding it up all the time. That way, just the situational modifiers are more fun to play with. The ogre's armor class 19, boom, she scores a hit. So that's a really streamlined, simple system. The thing that's probably new is the fact that all the different attacks, since they're based on powers, have a heavy reliance on a ability score for the attacker and an interesting form of defense for the defender. Like the defender's defense isn't always going to be an ability score. A lot of times it's 1 to 3 basic saving throws and an armor class, etc. Let's move on. Let's go to skill checks. So we talked about the ability check here. Here's the, where are we? Here we go, skill checks. The knowledge and talents your characters learn are represented by skill checks. When you use a skill, you hope for a result higher than the DC, which is difficulty class. For example, a cleric's heal check is a skill check against a specific DC. A rogue's stealth check is a check against a DC. If you play Pathfinder 2nd Edition, DC, it's all over everywhere. It has nothing to do with Angashang, right? Perception checks for people stealthing against a perception check. Sometimes they're opposed. Once again, the total modifiers you add to a skill check is your base skill check bonus. You can find more about that in Chapter 5. So once again, what is it? Everything you see in these little beige markers is the answer, right? 1/2 your level plus the relevant ability score modifier and then any other modifiers that happen. So for example, at like a 6th level wizard, Intelligence 18 is trying to identify a strange creature using his Arcana skill, right? His base skill check bonus is +12, which includes 3 for half his level, 4 for the intelligence modifier, 5 bonus for being trained in Arcana to see if he identifies the creature. He rolls a d20, adds 12. If he rolls a 7, his result's a 19, and the DC to identify a creature is only 15. He realizes it's a quickling. So, checks. Let's go back a little bit here, right? From the ability modifiers, you have these things jotted down associated with all their ability scores. You add half your level. That gives you this cool reference column all the time on your character sheet. Your attack rolls are going to use that column. Your skill checks are going to use that column. And you could have an ability check is going to use that column. Okay? So you're not making attacks. Sometimes you want to do, like I said a few minutes ago, here's a strength check example for breaking down a door. I'm not going to go through this in detail. You probably got it already. But once again, it's the same formula always throughout the whole game. It's half your level, relevant ability score modifier, and anything else associated with it. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is character races. There's a lot of them. There's 3 main books that came out 1 year apart. The Player's Handbook, which covers arcane, divine, and martial heroes, which basically means like spellcasters, holy casters, and melee-centric heroes. Player's Handbook 2 introduced primal-oriented heroes like druids and stuff like that, arcane, and more divine heroes. They added more classes 1 year later. And then in Player Handbook 3, they added psionic, divine, and then more primal heroes. So primal's in 2 books, divine is in all 3, and martial's only really in the first book. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the character races, and you can see how they get, some of them have special abilities, some of them have bonuses to their ability scores. So there's some interesting thing going on with the races. So first, let's just look at the ones in the Player's Handbook 1. Dragonborn, okay? they got a height and a weight, but they always get a bonus to their ability score. So if you're doing that standard array and you're starting off with 16 in your strength, you get to add +2 to strength. I don't know why Dragonborn ever were given charisma bonus. I guess they're great leaders and confident or something like that, because they sure as hell don't look good. But, and it tells you all the things you need to know, and this is going to be pretty typical for every single one of these races we have in here. They have bonuses to certain skills. When you're bloodied, you gain a +1 racial bonus to attack rolls. Bloodied is, in this game, is a really cool effect. Anytime you're below 50% health, you're considered kind of beat up. Maybe like an adrenaline rush kind of happens, you can attack. Dragonborn get a little racial ability here that's in red called Dragon Breath. And as you can see, this is the first time you can take a look at one of these powers, okay? It'll say what kind of power it is at the top. It'll tell you how many actions it is. It'll tell you what kind of targets there are, what the attack roll is. So in this situation, the attack is strength +2 versus reflex, constitution +2 versus reflex, or dexterity +2 versus reflex. You have 3 options to making this roll. If you're a really high strength character, you would want to use that. If you're a real high constitution, very tanky character, you might want to use that. If you're like roguish looking character and you're playing a Dragonborn like Thief or something, you might want to use that. So that Dragon Breath ability takes in consideration your ability scores. The defense against it's a reflex save, like it's a spell, like the old days with Fireball, right? The hit damage is 1d6 plus Constitution modifier. So as you can see, your ability scores make a big difference throughout the game, and it tells you what it does. Okay, so I always love these things they put in 4th edition to tell you, like, play a Dragonborn if you want to look like a dragon. Be proud heir of an ancient fallen empire, to breathe acid, cold, fire, lightning, or poison, or be a member of a race that favors the warlord, fighter, and paladin classes. So there's a new class, and there's a number of new classes in 4th edition. One's called a warlord. They broke the game down into different types of roles, like controller and striker and leader type ones and things like that. I forgot what the leader one's even called. But those were like roles to define what to do when you're playing, but it doesn't matter. Tank healer, DPS, range DPS, melee DPS, it's all the same thing. You play any MMOs, done any PvP or raiding, you know about this. So Dragonborn, right off the bat, it's one of the first races. The dwarf is in the game, high constitution, high wisdom, dungeoneering and endurance bonuses. They have some, things like cast iron stomach, dwarven and weapon proficiency. So you play a dwarf if you want to be tough, gruff, and strong as bedrock, to bring glory to your ancestors or serve as your god's right hand, to be able to take as much punishment as you dish out, to be a member of a race that favors the paladin, cleric, and the fighter classes. You have abilities like stand your ground, etc. Now, I'm not going to read through every single one of these. If you want to see a copy of these slides, I'll put them on my Patreon page. Eladrin. This was a very interesting move on their part. I thought it was a little confusing. What are Eladrin? Graceful warriors and wizards at home in the eldritch twilight of Feywild. Creatures of magic with strong ties to nature, Eladrin live in cities in the twilight realm of Feywild. Their cities lie close enough to the world they sometimes cross over, appearing briefly in the mountain valleys and the deep forest glades before fading back into the Feywild. So this is a lore concept, the Feywild. They get an ability called Fey Step. You vanish from one place and appear in another. Very powerful. It's like a teleportation ability. So they're pretty much like a very magical elf that crosses over into this other realm called the Feywild. That's a new race you can play. And of course, you can play a half-elf. Nothing there that we haven't seen before. Be an outgoing, enthusiastic leader, charismatic hero, equal at home in 2 different cultures. Be a member of a race that favors the warlord, paladin, and warlock. Go back to your Eladrin. You can tell they favor the race of the wizard, rogue, and the warlord classes. You've got the halfling, right? Being small, you can't use 2-handed weapons like great swords and halberds. When you use versatile weapons such as longsword, you have to use it in 2 hands, but you don't deal any additional damage for doing so. You get little second chance racial ability, bonuses to your dexterity and your charisma. Play a halfling if you want to be a plucky hero who is all too easy to underestimate, to be likable, warm, and friendly, to remember a race that favors the rogue, ranger, and warlock classes. So each one of the races has a reason for picking them. They're not just a fluffy thing, right? If you're creating a character theme and a concept, which I highly encourage people to do, is I wonder if I try playing an Eladrin warlock, which would be better, a Dragonborn or a halfling? Like those are the kinds of decisions you need to make, right? Well, I mean, is the class using charisma and dexterity? If not, maybe that's not a good choice to pick the halfling. Pretty straightforward stuff. Okay, then you have the human. I think I must have somehow skipped the elf. I mean, I know for a fact that the elf was in the first book. Hang on, let me open my book here right next to me, just to absolutely be sure I didn't make a mistake here. Yeah, the elf. I skipped the elf for some reason. I don't know why. Let me just give you a quick overview of the elf. Their dexterity and wisdom, not intelligence. Their speed is really high at 7 squares. They call everything you see is like 6 squares for human. This means basically 1-inch squares, which means 5 feet. So 6 times 5 is 30 movement rate for human. Elf is 35. The Eladrin is 6, so an elf can outrun an Eladrin for some reason. Sorry, apologies for that on the elf. I made these slides today, and I must have somehow skipped the elf. But the elf is in the game, yes. Then you have this tiefling thing. I'm not a big fan of them, but hey, if you like the fantasy of it, I mean, they're all going to be all over Baldur's Gate 3 here, which is coming out like August the 3rd. So, be a hero has a dark side to overcome. To be good at tricking, intimidating, persuading others to do your will. Be a member of a race that favors the warlock, warlord, rogue class. So they're an intelligence, charisma-oriented race. They have a couple of fire resistance abilities, and they have a power called Infernal Wrath as well. So then you go to the Player's Handbook 2, where they added some really wacky race choices I'd never seen, and I never seen again. Like, I only ever seen them appear here. I never saw them appear again. And these are pretty crazy. And this was released in 2009. This is Mike Merle's Jeremy Crawford and James Wyatt. The first one was a diva, right? And the diva's intelligence and wisdom. Talking about pure spellcaster oriented. Play a diva if you want to be dimly remembered connections to 1,000 heroic lifetimes. That's kind of vague. To embrace the cause of good and strive for perfection in all you do. To be a member race that favors the Avenger, Cleric, Invoker, and Wizard classes. What they did with Player Handbook 2 and Player Handbook 3 is they gave players more options, which is great because then you're selling books to players as opposed to DMs all the time. Adventures are for DMs, player powerful things are going for players. So you want someone to buy a book, you got to make a book that's useful to people. So you give them race options, and then you give them class options, and then mix and match matrix of 8 new races and 6 new classes becomes like 138 possibilities. Anyway, so the diva was one of them, immortal spirits who embody virtue, born and reborn to mortal life in the world. Kind of strange. The wing thing with them I thought was kind of weird, but hey, whatever. They added this next guy's here in the Feywild is a gnome, right? So in the Feywild, the best way for a small creature to survive is to be overlooked while suffering in servitude to the Fomorian tyrants of the Feydark gnomes. Learn to hide, to mislead, and deflect. So play a gnome can be curious, funny, and tricky. So they have high intelligence, high charisma. There's no big bonus to their dexterity. To rely more on stealth and deception than the brute strength and intimidation. To be a member of a race that favors the bard, sorcerer, warlock, and wizard classes. So, they have a fade away. You turn invisible in response to harm. Encounter illusion, immediate reaction, personal. Trigger, you take damage. You're invisible until attacked till the end of your next turn. What a great ability. And some of these things are powerful. They're more powerful than some abilities that you would actually really have in an MMO. A lot of complaints about 4th edition was it felt like a computer game. It has a lot of cool active abilities and some passives. But ones like that are just incredibly overpowered, right? The next one was this Goliath, a huge, tall, crazy-looking, kind of white-eyed guys. They move, 6 squares. They move pretty fast. Well, most about strength and constitution. Goliaths are mountain-dwelling nomads who see life as a grand competition. Their scattered bands have never been major players in the politics of the lowland world, but they have wandered the mountain ranges of the world since the primordials first shaped the peaks and valleys. Tall and massive, Goliaths revere the primal power of nature and use it to enhance their own strength. Play a Goliath, well, if you want to be tougher and stronger than nearly anyone. To master rugged mountain slopes, to be a member of a race that favors barbarian, fighter, and warrior. Great for, knock them down, drag them out, melee class. They gain and resist to 5 damage to one of their little racial abilities, one of their racial powers. So they're really strong, but they're also quite tall. Half-orc, or is it orc? I always consider it to be half-orc. So the history behind the orc in this situation is still leaning on the Forgotten Realms. An obscure legend claims that when Coraline put out Grumish's eye in a primeval battle, which I believe is in the book Evermeet, part of the savage god's essence fell to earth where it transformed a race of humans into fierce half-orcs. Another story suggests that an ancient hobgoblin empire created half-orcs to lead orc tribes on the empire's behalf. Yet another legend claims that a tribe of brutal human barbarians chose to breed with orcs to strengthen their own bloodline. Some say that Kord created half-orcs, copying the best elements from human and orc races to make a strong and fierce people after its own heart. If you ask a half-orc about its origin, you might hear one of these stories. You also might get a punch in the face for asking such a rude question, which I thought was very funny. +2 to strength, +2 to dexterity. That's a great combination. Heights from 5'9" to 6'4", That's like lightweight and heavyweight division. Play at half orc if you want to be big, strong, and fast. Harness anger and resilience and combat power. To be a member race that favors barbarian, fighter, ranger, and rogue classes. Their free action is personal. It's a furious assault. Your monstrous wrath burns inside you, giving you strength to attack. Your attack deals 1W, which means 1 times weapon extra damage if it's a weapon attack, or 1d8 extra damage if it isn't. So they're a fantastic race to play as well. Then they added this next one here, these shifters. You know, they kind of look like wild people, right? The shifters are fierce hunters, strongly influenced by their animal nature. Though they can't fully change shape in the lycanthrope ancestors can, shifters can become more bestial during the heat of battle, calling on primal power of the beast within. Play a shifter if you want to tap into bestial strength or speed in battle, to be a character in tune with your primal savage nature, to be a member race that favors the druid, fighter, ranger, and warden. 2 powers for them: long tooth shifting. You unleash the beast within and take on a savage countenance. Until the end of the encounter, you gain +2 bonus to all your damage rolls. In addition, while you're bloodied, which means below 50% health, you gain 2 regeneration, and then at higher levels that goes 4 regeneration, 6 regeneration. That's really great. There's different types of them. There's razor claw shifters and long tooth shifters, so they have different bonuses to skills and ability scores. You have to make a choice there. And so the power here depends on which of the 2. If you pick a long tooth, you get the long tooth shifting. You pick a razor claw, you get razor claw shifting. So I thought that was a very interesting racial choice, very different than your run-of-the-mill Tolkien rip-off junk, right? Player Handbook 3 added some strange stuff to the game. They added minotaurs. Jason Blum would love this, right? So minotaurs, we all know this from Greek mythology. There's like 7'5", 350 pounds, +2 strength, +2 constitution. Another big tanky walking wave of destruction. Having a goring charge is one of their abilities. Play a minotaur if you want to be a mighty warrior, amazing strength and endurance, or get your horn stuck on stuff while going through doorways. To be a monstrous adventurer struggling against villainous tendencies. To be a member of a race that favors a barbarian, fighter, warden classes. Yes, we all agree with that. The next one is a section where we're going to talk about how does it work. So 4th edition has a very interesting progression system. We're going to use the cleric here as an example. So you start off as a cleric, and this picture, this orange bald-headed fella to the left here. Let's say he's chosen a cleric. As soon as he decides to play a cleric, he has to kind of decide, well, which subversion, subclass of the cleric. I'm going to be a battle cleric or a devoted cleric. This kind of stuff was a never-winner when it first came out in 2012, but then they buckeyed the game into being a 5th edition clone these days. So once you do that, you level through what they call the heroic levels. And when you hit level 10, as soon as you go to level 11, you have what's called a paragon path, which is really kind of emphasizing your area of expertise. So you could be a battle cleric, and then you could pick a different one of these paragon paths, which opens up more abilities and feats and things like that, like an angelic avenger, a divine oracle, a radiant servant, or a war priest. So it's like having an archetype to some degree in Pathfinder, but you're not multi-classing. You're just further finding an area of expertise for how you like to play, which is great because by the time if you start level 1 and get to level 11, you're going to be like, I can't wait to get to 11 so I can get to war priest or whatever. Now, in the base version of the game, you can see that every single one of these classes, the rogue, the fighter, the warlock, the paladin, the warlord, the ranger, and the wizard, they all got these 4 choices they get to work with, except for the warlock who only gets 3. From a levels 11 through 20 is when you're going to be able to advance your character in these paragon paths, along with all the different types of at-wills and counter powers and things like that, which we'll talk about in more detail in a minute. When you finally get to level 21 to 30, every single level, there's things called, epic destinies, which are hugely, incredibly big deals, right? There's only a few of them, and some are relatively agnostic. They're not as class-based as the paragon paths are. This is like your impact on the world's the theme, right? Only the Archmage is the one that's required to be a wizard. And the Deadly Trickster one, you can do that, but it has a requirement for dexterity. So some requirements you have to meet to choose one of these epic destinies while you're leveling from 21 to 30. And yes, the max level in the game is level 20. So this is something very different. As soon as you pick your class, you may have 2 or 3 subclasses to get to pick from. And then when you hit level 11, you're going to have choices about paragon paths. So you have to look at each player handbook 1, 2, or 3 to find out what applies to you. So this is very different In some ways, it was kind of like Lineage 2. You know, you'd start off as one class and you branch into another class and branch into another class. These aren't really branches, they're just refinements. So you're narrowing it down. So you could be a battle cleric, war priest, demigod. You know, that's the kind of combinations you could have. All right, let's move on. So we're going to talk about classes, but each class deserves a video to itself. So if I have enough energy this summer, I will try to put together videos for that if you're interested. If you're interested in having videos about every single class, like here's a class about the Warlock, here's a class about the Druid, let me know and I'll put time and energy into it to make it if it's entertaining for you guys. Otherwise, let me just tell you what they are, okay? So in this video today, we're just going to tell you what they are. The ones in Player's Handbook, there's 8 of them. Player Handbook 2 has 8, and Player Handbook 3, I think, has 6 or 4. The Cleric, Divinely Inspired Warrior. Fighter, Master of Martial Combat. Paladin, Champion dedicated to a specific deity. Ranger, Ranger 2-weapon specialist. Rogue, Combatant who uses stealth or slyness to thwart enemies. Warlock, this is a new class. There was no Warlock in 3.5 unless it was added on by some add-on book I never heard of. A wield of arcane power gleaned from otherworldly entities. The Warlord is a commander who leads from the front. The Warlord is almost like a bard used to be, or a disciple of Cain in Warhammer Online. You can do a lot of things to give your abilities extra attacks and things to people next to you. So a frontline fighter that's really fantastic for helping out the party, passively almost. The Wizard, the world's most powerful purveyor of magic. Now, in Player Handbook 2, Primal, Arcane, and Divine Heroes, so they add the Avenger, which is a divine striker trained to secret rites to bring divine justice to the gods' foes. Barbarian, everyone knows what the Barbarian is these days. Striker who rages with primal fury, been around since 3.5, 3.0. The Bard's been around since AD&D, but has changed so much over the years. It's just not the same. They're kind of like a quasi-caster in 3.5 and in Pathfinder. I don't know what the hell they even are, if they even exist in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. We all know they're in 5e. But the Bard is an arcane leader who inspires and powers a magic song and verse. That's the way they should be, in my opinion. The Druid, a controller who's a master of primal magic, can take on animal forms. That's fantastic. The Invoker, new class you probably never heard of before. It's a controller class, which is crowd control. Wields raw divine power, the magic the gods use to fight the primordials, right? Then there's a Shaman. Shamans are fantastic in World of Warcraft. Playing a shaman in 4e is a little bit different. It's not the same thing. You're not playing a Resto or Enhancement or anything like that. So they're a mystical leader, kind of like in EverQuest 1. Channel primal power through a spirit companion. The Sorcerer, a striker, which means a DPSer, who has an open floodgate of unshaped arcane might. The Warden, a staunch defender who channels the power of earth and root. So the Warden and the Druid are very similar in theme, but they play out very, very differently. So these options are fantastic, but by this time, if you've got the Player's Handbook 2, you've got 16 different classes to play from and a huge bucket full of different races to play with as well. Then there's one more book that came out in 2011, which is Player Handbook 3. These are some strange ones here. The Ardent is a psionic leader who manipulates the emotions of allies and enemies alike. The Battle Mind, a psionic defender who exercises the power of the mind and control the body. The Monk, a psionic striker who combines focused melee attacks unarmed. A Scion, a psionic controller who uses mental powers. A Rune Priest, a divine leader who uses mystical runes of the gods to form prayers and warding of destruction. And a Seeker, a controller who calls nature spirits to imbue arrows with projectiles of primal power. Some very strange class designs in a Player Handbook 3. Came out really late. But 2 or 3 years later, everything would be starting to fade away. Let's talk about powers a little bit here. So in 4th edition, you don't have a big spell book. You aren't just attacking with fighter feats and things like that. You have powers, and you get to choose them. At-will powers. You can use them as often as you want. They can be as simple as a weapon swing, or as an example here, level 1 cleric. At-will powers are always green, right? If you make little cards yourself, green for at-will, red for encounter powers, and kind of a darker gray color for the daily powers. So it'll say right there on there whether it's an encounter power or an at-will. It tells you whether it's a divine, etc., standard action, its range, the target, the attack. This is the thing I mentioned earlier. So imagine Sacred Flame, which is like sacred light shines from above, searing a single enemy with a radiance, while at the same time aiding an ally with a beneficial power. So this is wisdom versus reflex. So it's not a strength attack, you're not hitting someone with a flail. If you hit, you do 1d6 plus your wisdom modifier of radiant damage. and one ally you can see chooses either to gain temporary hit points equal to your charisma modifier or plus 1/2 your level to make a saving throw. Increase the damage to 2d6 at 21st level. All the abilities scale. They scale at those major tiers, I guess you could call it, of heroic and paragon. They don't scale beyond 30 because there's just nothing else to do then after that. And encounter power. So again, encounter power can be used anytime there's an encounter. So you could do an encounter, have a short rest, go to the next room, boom, use all your encounter powers again. It's always a good idea. It's also a great way to get healed up. And this game allows you to heal yourself up to full health really quickly. So you're almost going to every single fight, as long as you're not a dummy and have trained the whole dungeon, the ability full health, full powers, boom. Therefore, the enemy should be, boom, ramped up just as much, right? You're not going into a dungeon with enemies that are trickling you down over time. In AD&D, a lot of the enemies were trickling you down over time. In 4E, every single room, it can be a nasty death fight to the death, okay? So in this situation, all encounter powers are red. You can only use them once per encounter, and they all have their abilities. It's completely spelled out. For example, this healing strike one is strength versus AC. So, you know, you can tell right now, this is divine radiance gleams from your weapons. When you smite your enemy, your deity bestows a minor blessing in the form of healing for you or one of your allies. 2 times the weapon damage plus strength modifier radiant damage, and the target's marked until the end of your next turn. In addition, you or one of your allies in 5 squares you can spend a healing surge, which is how you heal yourself in the game. Every single class gets access to this. Every single class in the game can take care of themselves, pretty much. There's not one class that's just playing a healer healing all the time. But you can play a very dedicated healer, but you're also doing damage. You have something to do, which is one thing about 4th edition that's very different from the other ones. Everyone has something to do in combat. Everyone has some viable, cool, exciting power or ability to do that's either going to do damage and help, or debuff something and help, or knock something down and help. You don't have people waiting in the back wondering, gee, should I cast Cure Critical Wounds yet? That's a fun factor of the game. They did a really good job of making sure that when it comes time for someone having something to do, every single class, no matter what you pick, has things to do that are fun in combat. And of course, the last one is the daily power. Sometimes they're called utility powers, but daily power is only 1 time per day, right? You'd have to take what's called a long rest before you be able to do this. And even at level 1 as a cleric, you get the Guardian of Faith one. It's one you could pick. Like, you get choices here. You don't have to take the 3 they give you. There's other ones as well. In this situation, you conjure a ghostly guardian, indistinct except for a glowing shield emblazoned on your deity symbol. A burst of radiance erupts from it to see your foes that move on to the next. And it has all the abilities and describes what it does here. Once you use it, it's wiped from your mind until your god or god gives it back to you again. So daily powers also include a lot of area effect things and things like that are very powerful. Okay, character progression. Wow. So we talked earlier about how you have heroic, and then you go up to paragon, and then you have this epic destiny thing later on. You get to choose while your level's 21 to 30. Well, the advancement still using the basic concept of the old days. Gain experience points. And it gets harder and harder and harder every level. It doesn't double. It only doubles in the low levels, and then it just starts doing like 250,000, 100,000, etc. So on this column on the left, which you should be able to see okay, is like the total amount of experience that you need to gain to get to the next level. And then every time you gain a level, you get a bonus. You either gain power or features, like gain an encounter power or attack power, or you gain +1 to 2 ability scores. Let's say you just hit level 8. You were level 7, you hit level 8 at 13,000 experience. That's your total experience so far, not how much you learned since the last level, right? So that's 12,000 more experience than it would take to get to level 2. You get +1 in 2 of your ability scores. And if you look down the entire chart here, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 situations where you get +1 to 2 of your ability scores. Excuse me, I'm mistaken. 2 of them give you +1 to all of them. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times by leveling from level 1 all the way up to level 28, where you get +1 to 2 of your ability scores. So you imagine say you start off with 18 strength. At level 4, it could be 19 strength. At level 8, it could be 20 strength. At level 11, it's got to be 21 strength no matter what. Then at level 14, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. You might be running around with 26 strength as a human fighter by the time you're level 20, but you're not running with 50 strength, okay? You also gain powers and features on every level and a number of feats that you can know. So all you got to do when you're leveling up your character is just take a look, and you can plan ahead what you're going to take and start thinking about what you're going to take when you gain a level. Like you might gain a daily attack power, you might just gain a feat, you might gain a utility power and gain a feat. It might be a max number of feats that you could possibly know. The total powers known with at will, encounter, daily, and utility is going to be a little chart here on the right hand side, like 2-1-1, 2-2-1-1. If you're playing spellcaster in D&D, this is not odd to you. So for example, someone who's at 16th is going to know 2 at will powers, right? 4 encounter powers, 3 daily powers, and 5 utility. Now that's controlled in a really interesting way. I'm not going to go into it in this video. If you get into the game, you will figure that part out, okay? I'm not going to cover everything, but I want to get you a sense of how it works, okay? So your progression, the experience points is equalized. Every single class uses the same experience point number column. Your ability score bonuses, at-will powers, encounter powers, utility powers, feats, and the number of feats you know. That's what the progression system is in the game. You will gradually become more and more powerful, but as you can see, even if you're level 30 and you have 26 strength, it's not, and you take your level and divide it by 2, that's 15, plus a d20 roll would be a minimum of 35, plus 2 for proficiency, right? And then your strength modifier for being 28 at 26. I mean, you can see you might get some 40s in there, right? But it's not going to go higher than that. Let's go to the next one. So skills, yes. Just like in 3.0, there's skills that have themes like acrobatics, arcana, bluff, diplomacy, dungeoneering, etc. And yes, they're associated with a related ability score. Some of them are knowledge oriented, like arcana. Some of them are action, like trying to pick a lock. If you're going to do a skill check, we're going to remind you again, you have these following bonuses. When you train a skill in 4th edition, you only train it once. You don't pick 2-weapon fighting once and then improve 2-weapon fighting or anything like that. Those are feats that you have in this version of the game. You don't pick skills like in 3.5 like stealth, and you put 2 points and then 2 points and 2 points and 2 points. And by the time you're level 18, you've got like plus 20 to the thing, right? You don't do that. You take the skill once and you just get a flat plus 5 bonus for the rest of your career. And you can never take the same skill again. You pick different ones over time. Okay? Now things that can affect your skill bonus check, which once again, half your level, ability skill modifier, plus flat 5, right? Say you're stealthed, right? You have an armor check penalty. You can look up the armor you're wearing. It might modify your skill checks. You might have racial feat bonuses that make you even better. You might have a power bonus from using a certain power, etc. And if you're doing a skill check, you roll a d20, add all those numbers together, and try to beat the target number. Nothing about that is bizarre at all. The thing I like about this, I love this flat 5 bonus. I love not having to keep picking the same thing over and over, feeling compelled to take, hide and take hide over and over and move silently over. And that's one thing in 3.5 I couldn't say. I was like, well, I really need to keep taking 2-weapon fighting and improve 2-weapon fighting, and then I need to take this and finesse weapons to be able to do well with 2 rapiers. I like that because I take the skill once and it's mine. And then from that point forward, everything else that happens to my progression benefits it. So it's not that big of a deal. Much more cleaner system. Of course, we're going to get into feats. So there's 4 kinds basically. Your class will have feats. There will be a thing called divinity feats, right? Clerics and paladins and certain people that are special powers granted you by your deity, right? It's called divinity feats because divine brackets. They'll mention that for you when you look at it. There's also multi-class feats. It's a special category, and this whole set of rules for multi-classing and how that works out. For example, a student of battle multi-class warlord. There's lastly racial feats. So when you pick a class, like you pick a race, like halfling, lost in the crowd is a feat that only they get to have. So the feat section of the book is very particular to the class you're playing, your deity, and if you're multi-class, assume you're not, and in your race. So the choices you made earlier are going to impact what you have access to when it comes to feat. Unlike in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, where you're like, oh, I get to pick a feat, let me just pick anything. So it's a little bit more of like, well, what seems to make sense for your race and your class combination? I like that because it's more thematic. Does that make sense? All right, cool. Now there's a huge, massive list of them all. Everything from action surge to halfling agility, to precise hunter, etc. These heroic feats. There's a lot of them here. A lot of them. And you can look it up in the book, but you'll see that some of them are class and race specific. Okay? Then you have Paragon tier. Remember Paragon? Paragon's level 20, level 11 to 20. So you get things like Iron Will and Sly Hunter and Spear Push. Some of these are actives and things like that. And then the epic tier from level 21 to 30, you pick up all kinds of things like 2-weapon flurries and light blade mastery and pick mastery. These are things at the high end of the game where you need to do if you're really focusing on like bludgeoning mastery, right? Axe mastery, arcane mastery. For example, to do arcane mastery, you have to be a wizard. To do running shot, you have to be an elf. So these are interesting choices that don't allow everyone to pick everything. That's one thing in Pathfinder 2nd Edition has this like, everyone gets to pick everything, which is cool because you can't make a bad character because all of them are pretty good. But I like this kind of old school vibe in 4th Edition where I really kind of think about what is my character good at doing. I'm not just an anonymous dude that can do everything. I have a style and a theme related to what my character is about, right? Combat. Gosh, this will be long. I'll try to be so long-winded about it, but there's some basic concepts right up front you got to understand. Healing in 4th edition is extremely convenient and very easy. It's almost similar to healing in Guild Wars 2. You have a short rest, about 5 minutes long, right? You can spend a healing surge, right, which will heal you. And a healing surge will heal you for a particular amount. In fact, we got a slide that talks about healing specifically later on. You can using powers while you're resting, right? If you get interrupted, you have to rest another 5 minutes. It's only 5 minutes. That's the length of a UFC round. Between rounds, you get a 1 minute rest. So resting for 5 minutes, it'll replenish all your encounter powers, if I'm not mistaken. An extended rest. This is at least 6 hours, so the fourth of a day. Once per day, you finish an extended rest, you have to wait 12 hours before you can do another one. So you don't just keep doing. You can't do an extended rest back to back to back. Let's say you're doing the Temple of Elemental Evil, and it's a lot of fighting in that dungeon the first few levels. You can't go in one room, wipe out 35 gnolls, and then go back into the room and knock the door closed and spike it closed, and then spend an extended rest multiple times in a row, right? You have to wait 12 hours before you can do another one. So you could do a 6-hour rest, then you got to wait 12 hours and do a 6-hour rest. You could do 2 per day, and you regain hit points and ceiling just while you're doing that. There's no strenuous activity. So you renew your encounter powers. Yes, of course, in the short rest renews your encounter powers. You also gain some your encounter powers and your daily powers. So in essence, technically, in one day, you could gain your daily powers back twice. So, days 24 hours, 6 hours of rest, daily powers are back. Wait 12 hours, the last 6 hours to midnight, get your daily powers back. So that's very forgiving and really nice. You can also get action points. I'm not going to discuss action points a lot in this video today because I'm kind of talking about the overall system. But action point is like something you can spend, you can get at milestones. It's very similar to like hero points in Pathfinder. Different DMs use them in different ways. But anyway, if you get interrupted, the total time you spent has to be taken into consideration. So most people doing dungeon crawls are doing a short rest. It's only 5 minutes. You're just catching your breath. You can go in there and start doing your at-will powers again. And if you really want to, if you're really falling in love with your encounter powers, you're like, do we have time really to rest for 6 hours? Or we can only do it twice today. So it becomes hard to decide, but you still will spend. And that's one of the things about the old days, like, I'm not going to cast my 2 fireballs until we really need it. And then you get to the whole adventure, you never cast fireball once the whole time. So it's a really interesting system. It gives you a chance, because everyone has something to do in combat, gives you a chance to do something and get it back and just try out different combinations, because a lot of the abilities have synergies with other people. Initiative. Okay, you think you know everything about D&D, right? Initiative's pretty straightforward. Roll a d20, 1/2 your level, your dex modifier, any bonuses apply. That sounds great. Everyone's heard of that before. Nothing about that's crazy. But surprise is different. Surprise! When the combatants achieve surprise, they act in the initiative order during the surprise round. Surprise combatants don't act at all during the surprise round. So, say you win initiative. Say you and your buddies ambush a caravan going down the road, right? You're going to steal the money out of it. Whatever. Say you're a bunch of lawful evil bastards. you ambush a caravan and start shooting spells and shooting bows at them, right? So if you achieve surprise, which is kind of like, well, the DM says, well, you've achieved surprise. We didn't have to roll for it or anything. The people that won the surprise get to act in initiative order, like nuke it, shoot it, burn it on fire, summon bears to attack it, whatever. The people that are being attacked are like, oh, that's all they get to do. Then the next round happens, and then the initiative gets rolled for sure, and then you got a situation where they could lose the initiative. You get 2 rounds of wiping guys out. So getting surprise in 4E is very tactically cool, right? It can be overpowered if you're not careful with it. So the surprise round, there's two special rules. The limited action. If you get to act in the surprise round, you can take a standard action, like a move and a minor action. You can also take free action, but you can't spend action points, right? What is action points? This is the things I tell you earn at milestones. They're a little bit different. Ignore that for now. If you're surprised, you can't take any actions. No free actions, no immediate actions, no attack of opportunity, and you grant combat advantage to all attackers. Combat advantage is +2 people hitting you. It's all over the game. Combat advantage, combat advantage. If you played Neverwinter, you see these little combat advantage, little yellow arrows that point behind you. As soon as the surprise round ends, you're no longer surprised, so that doesn't happen anymore. So the game is really, really nice of making all the modifiers to the dice rolls. There's nothing ever over +2. There's really no, it's always just +2, which is about 10%, right? Now, let's go on to the next area. Whoops. So in your turn comes up, you have this really tricky action thing you can do, right? Obviously you can move. Obviously you can attack. You have minor actions you can do. You have free actions you can do. You can do them in any order. It's not a 3-action economy, it's an economy, but you can do them in any combination, up to 5 different types of combinations, right? So what is a free action? You can take any number of free actions you want in your turn. A free action is like dropping something, right? Or yelling something. You can do it in any order. You don't have to move first and then attack, or drop a potion and then move and then attack. You can do it in any order you want, right? You can cast a spell and then move away, right? You can cast a spell, move away, and say retreat. You can cast a spell, move away, and say retreat, and throw a ball on the ground. I mean, you can do all kinds of fun things. Substitute actions. You can take a move action or a minor action instead of a standard action. It's going to be confusing for you to follow. So let's look at the chart on the right-hand side. Option 1, standard action. Cast a spell, nuke, shoot a bow. Move action, move away, move in closer. Minor actions, open a door, pull a wand out, switch to a sword and shield from two-handed weapon. Option B, standard action, 2 minor actions. Option C, 2 move actions. So someone can be 90 feet away, right? 90 feet away. Let's just make it easier. Let's say it's 100 feet away, and you're going to have to close the gap. They're all archers. They're shooting at you. And you can move 30. You might want to move twice. That's 30 and 30 and 60 to get within 40 feet range and pull out your bow and shoot someone. So you can do a lot of movement. You can also you can move in range to get someone to attack you and then move out of range. You can move to attack someone and move back out of range. There's an attack of opportunity that happens in here. Now, Chapter 9 has all the details for opportunity actions like triggered, immediate, interrupts, and reactions. So if you get into the game, you want to play it, that chapter is really good. It's not very long. It's very straightforward. It's in the player's handbook. You don't even need the DM's guide to play the game. The DM's guide is more fluffy stuff, but it explains all these different types of things you can do. So the combat is different. If you use your actions properly, and if your DM isn't going to be too mean to you about which he considers a free action, you can do all kinds of fun things. So it's really interesting combat. All right, so let's go forward. So a melee attack, you heard that say that before, right? Or a range attack. The range of a melee attack is your reach of your weapon, right? Most people can reach 1 square, which is 5 feet away from them. The melee attack is depends on which power you use, but that's how those work. Ranged attacks are also depend on the power. Some have specific distances, like line of sight and things like that. If you use a range attack while you're right next to someone, the enemy can make an opportunity attack against you. That's a rule even I have in Decimation, my historical role-playing war game. So some powers will let you make multiple melee attacks. So it's really straightforward. Melee and range attacks, nothing new here, nothing you've never seen before. That's really weird. The attack roll. Now, we didn't talk about spell casting. That's because there aren't spells in the game. There's powers. There's not spells. They're powers, which are spells. So the attack roll. Yes, like we said in the beginning, you roll a d20. The attack power is base attack bonus, which is all your ability scores and your ability modifier and your half your level number and your proficiency bonus if it applies. You have a melee basic attack, strength versus armor class. Ranged base attacks is dexterity versus armor class. So you have an ability called Stunning Steel. It's strength versus fortitude. Fireball, intelligence versus reflex. Cause fear, wisdom versus will. So you aren't necessarily trying to hit all the time, but you may have situations where that's how you have the attack roll. You still roll the dice. Roll a wisdom versus the defender's will, right? And the defender may get to defend. With AC, they're not going to roll. Here's an example. Armor class is how hard you are to hit. It's more, in D&D, it has always been this broad concept. It's never been this specific little detail of mitigation like I have in Decimation. Decimation is supposed to be that way because we don't have any spell casting. Fortitude is your inherent toughness, strength, resilience, or physique. Reflex measures your ability to predict attacks, deflect, and dodge out of the well, like get out of the way of dragon breath or fireball. Will is your defense against effects that daze and disorient and confuse. So those things are not new. But remember, all the powers that you have in a game will tell you which type of check needs to happen here. Okay? So these are called defenses. Remember how we said just a moment ago that there's attacks? What's the defense against the attack? Base defense. All defenses start with 10 plus 1/2 your level. So this is very similar to what you saw in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. All armor class, your armor class number starts with 10, but it doesn't add 1/2 your level. Armor class adds an armor bonus of the armor you wear and the shield bonus of the shield you carry. That adds on top of this. So you have a base defense already 50% plus 1/2 your level. If you're level 10, that's a 15 base defense. But remember, everyone else is scaling up too. All the numbers are scaling up equally and intermittently. Fortitude, add your strength modifier or your constitution modifier. So you get to choose what's going to be your fortitude. Add your reflex, add your dexterity modifier or your intelligence. You get to choose. If you're using a shield, it's a shield bonus. Add for will, add your wisdom modifier or charisma modifier, whichever is higher. So it's no longer just reflexes, dex, fortitude is constitution, and will is wisdom. It used to be that way in 3.5. Now you got the options. Every single one of your ability scores is useful, and every single one of the classes use different ability scores in different combinations, and different races have bonuses to use these 2. Everyone's always getting 2 that are focused, 2 they want to benefit from, etc. There's racial and feat bonuses. You might have magic weapons. There might be an item bonus, a power bonus, etc. Let's go to the example here. Brandis, a 23rd level human fire, has the following defenses. His armor class is 38. 10 plus 11, which is half the level because he's level 23, plus 11 armor bonus from Warplate armor, plus 2 for a shield, for a heavy shield, plus 4 for enhancement bonus from plus 4 Battleforged armor, right? His reflex is 31, so it's 10 plus 1/2 his level, plus 1 racial bonus, plus 2 for his dexterity modifier, plus 2 for that shield bonus from the heavy shield, plus 5 from an enhancement bonus from a cloak of resistance, plus 5. Fortitude, 35. You can see these numbers are working out. They're pretty straightforward. 10 plus 1/2 your level, plus your racial bonus, plus 2 for being a fighter, plus 6 for strength modifier. So the thing is, you're going to have these things pre-calculated. If you're looking at this thing here, it's like we're doing an algebra balancing equations or something, or doing a mole in chemistry class. It's not like that. You have the stuff figured out ahead of time. But they're just breaking it down for you so you can see how it works. The unified rule here that's different is your base defense all start with 10 plus 1/2 your level. Armor as added on top of that. Okay? So that's one thing about the defense element of the game that's very different. Now, the game has conditions, right? I'm just going to list them here. Blinded, dazed, deafened, dominated, dying, helpless, immobilized, marked, petrified, prone, restrained, slowed, stunned, surprised, unconscious, and weakened. Hey, that's great. It's the first version of the game that had these kind of things in the game. I think they're cool. They're very straightforward. Most of the penalties are either +2 or -2. Only blinded is like -10 penalty for perception checks. And unconscious is you -5 penalty to all defenses. You can't take any actions. They're very, very brief. They're very straightforward. There's no doomed. Right? It's one of the Pathfinders kind of like, do what? So these are very straightforward, but they also have what's called ongoing damage. Ongoing damage has been a complaint by a few people having to track it. If you just use 3x5 cards and jot them down, it's not that big of a deal. It's like dot damage, like bleeds and burns and things like that. So if you may fail a saving throw, you might take damage for the next 2 rounds, or you might do damage to someone for the next 2 rounds. A freak might hit you with burst of fire that sets you on fire, and you continue to take fire damage. Or a snake venom might cause you to take damage every round until it gets cured. A mummy's rotting touch deals ongoing necrotic damage. Kruthik's corrosive spittle deals ongoing acid damage. Dot damage is fun. It's a lot of fun. It's not that hard to track. Don't complain about it. Get a 3x5 card and jot it down and keep track of it. You're going to be powerful anyway. You're going to have a lot of interesting, fun things you can do. You'll always be able to dispatch your enemies. Think about which enemies are going to do this kind of ongoing damage, which is damage over time. Critical hits. There's an element of critical hits in 4E, which is really mean. Really, really mean. Very different than what you might have as a house rule, which is like, oh, you roll the damage and you double it. A roll a natural 20. If you roll a natural 20 when making an attack roll, you score a critical hit if your attack roll is high enough to actually hit the target. So say that you only had a bonus to hit total, all your base attack bonus was 10, and something had armor class 38. You rolled a natural 20, you had your 10, you're nowhere near it. If your attack roll is too low to score a critical hit, you still automatically hit, but it's not a crit. Okay? One more time. If you roll a 20 on the die when making an attack roll, you score a critical if your total attack roll is high enough to hit the target. If your attack roll is too low, you automatically hit. All right. Precision. Some class features and powers allow you to score a critical hit when you roll a number other than 20. Only natural 20 is an automatic hit. Now here you go. Listen to this very carefully. Maximum damage. Rather than roll damage, determine the maximum damage you can roll with that attack. This is your critical damage. Attacks that don't deal damage still don't deal damage on a critical hit. So one more time. You don't roll the damage and roll a bunch of 4s and 3s and 1d8s and roll 1s and double it. Rather than roll the damage, you determine the maximum damage you can roll with your attack. This means a natural 20, like this redheaded chick on the right that's bitch slapping the hell out of this Yuan Ti or whatever it is, snake dude. It's a drow. I mean, she's backhanding this guy into oblivion, right? So she's doing max damage to him. That's what you want to have happen. Now, extra damage. Magic weapons and implements, as well as high crit weapons, can increase the damage you deal when you score a critical hit. If an extra damage is a die roll, it's not automatically max damage. You have to roll that. So if something says, oh, you do this and an additional 1d8, you don't say the max damage including the 1d8 and roll that and then add. You see what I'm saying? That gets added at the end as the random number generator. Okay. We got about 10, 13 more slides. This is a big game. It deserves, it's a 1 hour video. Just feel free to scrub through it as you want to. Attack modifiers, when you're rolling to hit, they give you nice charts. There's charts everywhere. Everywhere is just spelled out for you, right? At top, if you have advantage against a target, like flanking someone, you get +2 to hit. If you're prone, it's -2. Attacker is restrained, -2. Target has cover, -2. Superior cover, -5, etc. Combat advantage. Remember you hear this talk about this earlier? You gain a +2 bonus on your attack roll when you have combat advantage. A lot of the abilities will say where either you're positioning or what you're doing. Like for example, if someone's stunned or distracted, gives you combat advantage, but you have to be able to see your target, right? So that's a consistent rule throughout the whole game. It's not too powerful, but it's something you can take advantage of when you're fighting something a little harder. So you're rewarded for your positioning, okay? All kinds of actions you can do. They give you a list of all of them. Administer a potion, aid someone, second wind, your total defense ability, crawl, escape, shift, stand up, run, walk. You can do minor actions, drop prone, load a crossbow, open a door. Immediate actions, you can ready an action then have it trigger later. Attack of opportunity, right? This happens when someone exits a square. Free actions, delay. It's all there in the player's handbook in chapter 9 in the combat section. I'm not going to read these all to you because you've heard of most of them before. But it's very straightforward of what you can and can't do. Now, let's go ahead and let's go about attack of opportunity real quick. An attack of opportunity is a melee basic attack. If the enemy leaves a square adjacent to you, you can make an attack of opportunity. However, you can't make one if the enemy shifts or teleports or is forced to move away by a pull, push, or slide. Remember, one of the actions you can do is shift. So you might want to think about that. It's like the one-step rule. Move one square without provoking opportunity attacks. Now you're not moving 2 squares, you're moving 1 square. So that prevents someone from getting a free swing at you when you're just going to move one square away, okay? Range and area powers can provoke. If someone is next to you, and I'm Billy and I'm fighting Stanky Orc, and you come running up next to me as Evil Wizard, and you start winding up a spell, it provokes an attack of opportunity. If Evil Wizard happens to be Evil Thief and he pulls out the bow or a throwing weapon, I get an attack of opportunity against him. Now, once your combatant's turn, you can only take one opportunity action during another combatant's turn, but you can take any number of them in the round. For example, if I'm standing in the middle of the room and there's an orc in front of me, an orc to the right of me, and an orc to the left of me. If the orc in front of me is attacking me and I'm defending, no problem. He attacks, I defend, blah, blah, blah. The orc to my left starts to shoot a bow. The orc to my right starts to shoot a bow. That provokes an attack of opportunity. If those 2 orcs move away after being attacked, like one of them almost gets killed, that provokes an attack of opportunity. I could be hitting each orc twice in the round, boom, boom, because they're in a 180-degree frustum. Very, very nasty, okay? I can only take one attack of opportunity during another combatant's turn, right? But you can take any number during a round. So for a hit, if the orc is shooting the bow next to me, and I do an attack of opportunity to interrupt his bow shot, if he moves and hasn't moved, I can't do it again, so that part's wrong. Okay. Able to attack, you can't make an attack of opportunity if you can't do anything. You can interrupt the target's action. You can do threatening reach, etc., etc. Hit points. Damage reduces your hit points. So your class level constitution score determines your maximum hit points. You're not rolling them. Your current hit points can't exceed that number. Bloodied. This is a cool concept in the game. You're bloody when your current hit points drop to your bloodied value or lower. Your bloody value is 1/2 your maximum hit points. You round it down. Certain powers effect will only work against bloodied enemies. Imagine someone's like Mortal Strike or World of Warcraft when someone's below 25% health. In this case, 50% health. When your hit points hit 0, you're dying, and you use a death saving throw, which I'm not going to go into now because there's rules in the book that tell you how to do that. But I do want to talk about healing surges. Most healing you spend requires a healing surge. When you spend a healing surge, you restore lost hit points to your current hit point total. Once per encounter, you can use Second Wind, which is another ability on the lower right-hand corner here. It adds +2 all your defenses and gain +2 until the start of your next turn. And one time per encounter, you can use your Second Wind, right? After a short rest, you can spend as many surges as you want outside of combat, but you can only spend a limited number of them per day after you take an extended rest. Some powers, either yours or other character, allow you to heal as if you had a healing surge. When you receive the healing, you don't actually spend the healing surge. Some of the cleric abilities will give you a free healing surge. So your class and constitution modifier determines how many healing surges you can use in a day. Now, what do you get for it? When you spend a healing surge, you regain 1/4 of your maximum hit points, rounded down. This number is called your healing surge value. Use it often. Note it on your character sheet. So you're fighting, you're taking damage, you've got cuts, bruises, damage on your arm or your shoulder blade. It's not the same kind of damage as in Decimation. We're not doing lacerations and cuts to the chest and things like that. We're kind of tactically creating a game that uses a bit of fiction here. So you can resist that damage, you can heal yourself, okay? As a general rule, monsters and non-player characters have a number of healing surges based on their tier. 1 for the heroic tier, level 1 to 10. 2 for Paragon tier, 11 to 20, and 3 from 21 to 30. Imagine fighting something at the heroic tier and the number of healing surges, you have 4 and they have 3, and people in your party, that's going to be a long, nasty fight. You want to dispatch something quickly. So healing is really, really different than any other game. A lot of the classes have things that they can do to amplify this for yourself, almost like a healer would. Okay, so be sure to read up the healing surge section if you want to check playing the game, because everyone has something fun and exciting to do during combat. No one's standing around waiting to heal people. No one's job is just to stand there and be the healer and do nothing like an MMO. Armor. You know, unlike Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and unlike D&D, the bonuses to armor are quite strong. Plate armor's +8, war plate's +11, right? Half plate, what is that? Does it even say here? They don't even consider it in here. Light shields, elder scale armor, all the different types of armor. You know, from the very top is cloth. As you work your way down, it gets more and more. As a minimum enhancement bonus, you can have the armor you wear can affect your checks, like make it harder for you to do things. It can reduce your speed, like plate armor does and chainmail does. I have rules in Decimation that are much more particular for this, and it has prices and weights on it. So armor is boosting your armor class in the most basic form. Melee weapons, just like in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, very different than what I have in Decimation. Sorry, I'll stop comparing it all the time. But weapons do big damage based on the D8, D6, D10, 2D10, 2D6, etc. And ranged weapons do damage as well. They have proficiency bonuses. Most of them are +2. Some are +3. Like if you're proficient with a sword, it's going to be +3 to hit. Or if you're proficient with a shuriken, it's +3 to hit. Everything else, like a rapier and a guitar or a javelin, is just +2. So when you specialize and you have a proficiency to weapon, you get a bonus to hit. And they'll have some properties like versatile or high crit or offhand, heavy thrown. You've seen some of that in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. They did it to a lot more detail. All those details are broken down in a particular chapter. But there's nothing really all that wild about the weapons. There's not very many of these like 1d4 useless weapons unless punching with your fist. Most things like a mace and a sickle, 1d8, 1d6. Flail, battle axes, 1d10. Longsword, 1d8. Scimitar, 1d8. Short sword, 1d6. Nothing too bizarre if you played AD&D. Now, I just want to quickly show you this section, like 4 or 5 pages, and we'll wrap things up. In the back of the book, they're in the combat section, they spend a tremendous amount of pages, maybe 4 or 5, maybe 7 or 8, talking about positioning using a battle map with miniatures and overhead view to discuss movement and positioning, speed, etc. When you create your character, when you have your character class and your race, you'll see your speed numbers there. It'll say the number of squares. It'll say 6 squares, 7 squares. You probably heard me say that earlier when I was talking about Eladrin. That's how many 1-inch squares you can move. Each one of those is 5 feet. So 6 times 5, 30 feet, right? So there's things that can affect your movement rate, like are you moving over nasty terrain? Are you moving through an occupied square? There's rules for how you can move. So kind of like in chess, you kind of need to trace the movement of your miniature when you're playing. You can't just say, I moved to here. You can't do that. You got to keep track of how many squares you're moving because it's much more tactical, right? And the reason why it's more tactical because it's more about the combat has powers that affect where people are and what they're doing. And it gives you a really interesting way to use your movement as an additional tool to help win the fight. It's not just whether you show up with a class with a build that's no good. All the classes are strong. All the classes have something to do. Your movement can make a big difference. So there's a number of pages in the back of the book that talk about difficult terrain, double move, falling, flanking, which gives you combat advantage. Push and pull, they have diagrams that show you what's flanking, what's not flanking. Those things are great to get a handle on because the flanking rules in some of the other games, especially Pathfinder, are kind of weird. The ones in 4E are really straightforward as you would expect. The only ones that are a little different is the ones about cover. So that's pretty much what I want to go over today. I know it's been a long video. It'll take hours to upload this thing, but 4th edition is extremely well put together. And if you have not had a chance to play it ever, you should at least get a copy of the books and consider ripping some of those rules out and sticking it in your D&D game. I mean, there's so many cool design elements. Rob Heinsu, Andy Collins, James Wyatt, who wrote this edition, and Logan Bonner was involved in this, who works at Paizo now, and a number of other people were involved in 4th edition. 4th edition is damn good, and it's got a lot of really cool things about it, and it's got a lot of great content that you could use too. So if you get a chance, dig into it. If you got a question or comment, or a correction if I've said something wrong, leave a comment below, and we hope to see you again real soon. Thanks for sticking it out this long. We'll talk to you later.